folks. How's it going? Always a pleasure to be here with the Reclamation Project. I have something very interesting for you all today, and the title of our talk today is the importance of independent thinking, the importance of thinking for yourselves. Now, interestingly, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 2, verses 11 and 12, there's a very interesting proverb. It says, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee. Let's look at that again. Discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee. So discretion, wisdom, the ability to make choices for yourself, understanding, knowledge of truth shall keep thee. So wisdom, the ability to make choices for yourself, wise choices, smart choices, good choices shall preserve thee. We all know what preservation is, right? And understanding, knowledge shall keep thee. And then it goes on to say, it says, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee, to deliver thee from the way of the evil man, from the man that speaketh froward things. So not only shall discretion preserve thee and understanding keep thee, but they will preserve and keep thee to deliver you from the way of the evil man, from the man that speaketh froward things. So here we have a parable, a proverb of wisdom telling us how important discretion and understanding it is. It is so important because we are literally, especially at the time in which we live, we are surrounded by charlatans. We are surrounded by evil men. We are surrounded by liars and by men speaking froward things. The problem with our society is that we are taught that if the majority likes a certain person, if the majority is comfortable with a certain person, believes in a certain person, voted for a certain person, then that person must be a good person. And that's not necessarily true. We need to look at somebody's actions, right? We need to not look at their political affiliation, their color, their race, or any other thing. We need to look at the contents of their character and of their actions in order to be able to determine whether or not this person is a good man or an evil man. And if this person is determined to be an evil man, a man that speaketh froward things, then we need to use discretion and understanding to preserve ourselves. That's what it's telling us here. Because here's the bottom line. Everyone likes to think of themselves as an independent thinker, right? Because being an independent thinker is a sign of intelligence. So obviously, most people would describe themselves as someone who thinks for themselves, of course, right? But one of the biggest obstacles to thinking for yourself is something called groupthink, okay? Some of you may have heard the term before, or maybe not, but let me define it for you. So what is groupthink? A psychologist by the name of Irving Janis, he coined the term, and he based it on his observation and studies of group choices formed in situations of trauma and suffering. So this, an article that I have from Psychology Today explains Janis's term, and it says, stating that groupthink stands for the idea that members of a group tend to refrain from expressing doubts and judgments or disagreeing with the consensus, and that in the interest of making decisions that further their group cause, members may also ignore ethical or moral consequences. So what does that mean? It means that when somebody is a part of a group, when they are a part of a group of people that all think the same way, they may tend to refrain from expressing doubts or judgments or opinions that are unpopular or that are outside of the consensus, that are outside of the norm for that particular group, that are outside of approved thought. And they may refrain from disagreeing with anything that the group thinks is right or wrong. And in the interest of furthering the causes of the group, whatever that may be, right or wrong, They may be silent when it comes to matters of ethics and morality, and that is dangerous. That is dangerous. We need to be able to, regardless of what group or what paradigm we may fall into, we need to be able to stand up and speak when we see something that does not jive with right, that does not mix with truth, that is off base or wrong. Why wouldn't we? Well, if you're trapped into something called groupthink, that will prevent you from doing that. Here they say, one of the reasons why you often see poor, disenfranchised groups as going on with movements that ultimately result in loss of rights and totalitarian regimes throughout history is because they very much fall into one of these two categories. So what happens? You look at countries that have been overrun by communism or socialism. And oftentimes, what you will see is a group of people coming in and saying, all of these rich people are the reason why you are suffering. All of these people are responsible for the ills of this world. What we're going to do is we're going to take away everything that they have. Anybody who resists, we're going to kill them. And we're going to create a utopian society where everybody has equal. Nobody has more than the others. And so a lot of times you have poor, disenfranchised people who will go along with this, despite the fact that the way that they're achieving their aims is evil and it's wrong. They may see things that they don't like, but they keep their mouths shut, thinking that it's for the quote unquote greater good. When you start hearing people use terms like the greater good, those are terms that people will use that are psychological trigger words that will keep people trapped into groupthink, right? Doesn't matter if you see something that's wrong or that you disagree with it. Keep your mouth shut, because this is for the group. This is for the greater good of society, and you have no reason to object. And what ends up happening is those people who take power in these totalitarian communist regimes end up living high on the hog, and everybody else is worse off than before. And they don't realize it until it's too late. Go ask the people of Cuba. Here's another article that I have, very interesting. It's from medium.com, and it says it's called The Dangers of Groupthink in Today's Society. And then the subheading is, don't go with your heart, don't go with logic, just shut up and go with the crowd. Isn't that what they tell us to do nowadays, right? Doesn't matter what you feel. It doesn't matter what logically, logistically makes sense. All that matters is that you are in line with the crowd. Well, for those of you who are Christians, one thing that I want you to realize and remember is that the crowd killed Christ. Did you hear what I said? The crowd killed Christ. So just because you are falling in line with the majority does not mean you are right. Okay? That is a fatal mistake. Don't ever think that just because the majority of people share the opinions that you share, that makes you right. That is a logical fallacy. I've talked about logical fallacies before, and it's important that you understand them, because people will try to use this logical fallacy called argumentum ad populum, right? Argumentum ad populum. What that means is, as long as the majority of people believe this, then it must be right. Well, the majority of people, for those of you who are Christians, thought that Christ was a crook, a charlatan, evil, and that he should be killed. Was that right? So it doesn't matter what the majority in your group thinks or what people in your group thinks. All that matters is what's right and wrong, and we need to be willing to stand out as individuals. Let me continue with the article. It says, many of these groups exact a price for this comfort and sense of inclusion. So many groups that you see in society, whether political, religious, whatever the scope may be, whatever category they fall into, many of these groups exact a price for being members of the groups, for being accepted, for being included. What's the price? Individuality and logic. If you're going to be a part of our group, of our community, you cannot think for yourself. You cannot use logic, question, doubt, or anything. You have to fall in line with the group. And if you don't, you're out. I'll give you a perfect example. When a young man or a young woman decides that they feel like they're in the wrong body and they want to transition, as they say, from a man to a woman or from a woman to a man, the LGBTQ plus community will accept them with open arms. They will love on them. They will encourage them. They will say, go, go right ahead, more power to you. You're so awesome. And they will put them up on a pedestal and tout them and praise them. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with a group of people encouraging you, right? And whether or not you believe that that's right or wrong, that's not the point of why I'm sharing this. That's another discussion for another time. But here's the thing: that same group that loves on people when they transition, when somebody, and I've read many very heartbreaking, sad stories about somebody who decides, I made a mistake. I thought that I wanted to live as a woman, even though I'm a man, but I realized living as a woman that this is not what I want. Or I thought that I wanted to live as a man, even though I'm a woman, and even though I've done all these extreme things, I realized that I just want to be a woman. And they do something called detransitioning. When that happens, more often than not, the individual that was praised, that was applauded, that was put on a pedestal for transitioning, when they decide that they no longer want to live that life and they detransition, they're shunned. They're shunned. And the same people that praise them turn their nose up at them, won't talk to them, and treat them as anathema, right? And why does that happen? It happens because oftentimes when you become a part of these groups that thrive on groupthink, the price that you pay is individuality and logic. And when you decide to use either one, you're out. You're out. And if you're curious about that, go look up stories about people who have detransitioned. It's really sad. But the article goes on and says, armored with a common sense of trauma, some groups find a collective punching bag to suffer the brunt of their unhappiness, other human beings, or other groups of other human beings. And when a group's mutual feelings of anger are focused on another group, an unfortunate side effect is illogicality. So, for example, and I'm going to go ahead and just hit those hot buttons today. So I hope you're ready. But let's take a lot of black folks in this country, and as you can see, I am one of them. But I like to call a spade and look at things in the most logical way possible. But you have a lot of black people that have experienced unfair treatment, that have experienced racism, that have experienced prejudice. I myself am one of them. I could tell stories all day long about some of the experiences that I've had living in even the liberal mecca of San Francisco, California, where I have experienced racism and prejudice directly for no other reason than I have more melanin in my skin than somebody else. It's the most illogical, stupid thing you could ever think of, and it's very frustrating, okay? However, despite the fact that I am a part of a group in this society that has been at times the victim of prejudice and of racist thinking and mistreatment and unfair treatment solely based on the color of our skin, I'm not going to go around and look at every single white person in this country and say, you're an oppressor, or you're benefiting from white privilege or whatever. And I'm not going to go around and look at every white person as the reason why I've experienced this difficulty or the cause of my pain and decide that all white people are bad or all cops are bad. I mean, that's illogical, okay? But as the article says, when a group's mutual feelings of anger are focused on another group, an unfortunate side effect is illogicality. So when you decide this one group is the reason why I've had difficulties and why my people have suffered, all of a sudden, what comes out of that is illogicality. Illogicality, anger, hatred, fear. And now what I'm seeing is I'm seeing Black people become the very thing they claim to be fighting against in many cases, and that is racist, prejudice people. And then people will say, oh, you can't use racist because we can get into technical decisions, but you all know what I mean. Bigots, right? They'll look at somebody who's white and judge them instantly simply because they're white. And that's illogical. But that's what happens when you fall into groupthink. The article says, because at its core, anger is an irrational emotion. It is based on suffering, not sensibility. And when groups make this emotional mandate for membership, it makes our world sicker than the virus that currently circulates throughout it. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? You see, some groups will say, I've been shunned by certain groups that you might look at me and think that I would fit right into simply because I say, no, that's not true. No, all cops aren't bad. I have family members that are police officers, that are law enforcement officers, and I respect them and they're good people. All cops are not bad. Or, some of my best friends on earth are white people. Who would have thought, right? And I don't look at them any differently. I mean, my best friend Greg, I call him my brother from another mother, right? And we are as far as aesthetics and looks, we're about as different as two people can be, but none of that matters to me because all I care about is the contents of your character, like the great Martin Luther King once said. The article goes on and says, even though people may feel a kinship to members of the groups that they interact with some of these when some of these groups demand allegiance to hatred and animosity rather than comfort and care, many of those members often choose to forfeit their individuality, their morality, and their logicality. For example, if certain members' own opinions of people or issues in this world differs from the group's worldview, they often try to desperately squash these opposing thoughts, even if their conscience begs them to do otherwise. Thus, the term groupthink comes into play, right? So the first thing that we have to understand about groupthink and the first really important truth that we must understand about groupthink is that people are individuals, right? That's the number one truth ignored by groupthink, is that people are individuals. We are not automatons. We cannot all think the same, feel the same, act the same, have the same emotional responses to certain things. I mean, I have been judged and called many names simply because I don't have the same visceral response to certain political figures and to certain groups of people in this world. And I've been called a number of very not nice pejorative terms as a result of that, and it's sad. It's sad. So why am I this? Simply because I don't respond and react with the same visceral reaction that you do. I'm an individual, for example, as a Black man, many people might think that one of the things that would be a serious trigger for me would be being called the N-word. We all know what that word is. And I will tell you, I'm in my mid-40s. I have been on this earth for many years, and I have been called the N-word on many occasions. Maybe not as much now as in the past, a different time. I'm thankful for that. But I have been called the N-word on many occasions. And, I realized that when I responded in a way that was angry, or that was, when I tried to fight fire with fire, it really was feeding into what they wanted. They wanted to ruin my day. They wanted to hurt me, to anger me, to damage me, because they hated me for no other reason than that I look different than them. And when I realized that, when that clicked as a young man, I realized, I said, I can't give them that satisfaction. I cannot allow them to have that power over me. So what I began to do is, when I would hear these negative things, these pejorative things, these very prejudiced, bigoted, racist things that would come out of people's mouths towards me, I would start to laugh. I would start to laugh and say, boy, you're having a bad day, aren't you? And it would just infuriate them. It would infuriate them. Now, some people might think that, well, if you don't respond with anger and things like that, then maybe you're whatever, right? No, I'm an individual. That's how I chose as an individual to respond to that. I don't need to go and fight somebody just because they call me the N-word. I can walk away laughing and recognize that they are not going to take my joy or my peace or anything like that. Because I read the Bible, and when I see Jesus dealing, I mean, these people were constantly on his heels trying to make him screw up, and it didn't work. It didn't work. Jesus walked away. Jesus would shut them up with some profound statement or thought and then just walk away. Because here's the bottom line. Our society, it just abounds with stereotypes about sex, ethnicity, race, religion. And we preach that stereotyping is wrong, that each human, is an individual being with their own vices and virtues and things like that. Yet people often align themselves with one-sided groupthink, even if it requires a willingness to accept things that they know are not true, like the idea that everybody in this particular group are bad, or everybody in that particular group are evil, or whatever, right? We need to be able to look at people as individual beings, no matter what group they belong to or quote unquote belong to or fall into. For example, I'm gonna hit that hot button again. For example, a Trump supporter, right? Are all Trump supporters bad and evil, racist, white supremacists? If you ask most people or many people, the answer to that would be yes. Okay. Now, if you ask somebody who's using their own mind and thinking for themselves, they'll say, of course not. Some people have their own reasons for supporting this or that person. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're evil. But if you ask somebody from certain groups, they'll say absolutely. And what does that do? What does that result in? It results in hatred. It results in illogical anger towards a specific group, looking at everybody, painting everybody with the same broad brush, and you become the very thing that you claim to be fighting against, and that is a bigot, right? That's the problem with groupthink. That's the danger of groupthink. So what is the remedy for groupthink? The remedy for groupthink is independent thinking. That's what we've been talking about. That's what I've been trying to get across to you from the very beginning, is the importance of independent thinking, being an individual, because if you're not an individual, you fall into the dangers of groupthink. We have to understand that in order to be an independent thinker requires that we may suffer some ridicule, because here's the thing. A lot of times groupthink is typically based on sort of that natural desire that we have to fit in, right? We all want to fit in. We all want to be a part of the popular crowd, the cool kids. We don't want to stand out. We don't want to suffer ridicule. Well, when you think like that, when that is the primary goal, is fitting in, right? You're living in a virtual prison of fear, because you can't do this or that. You can't think this or that. You can't say this or that, or else you're out. In order to be immune to that need to being a member of the inner ring or the cool kids, or however you want to call it, you have to have a sense of integrity. Like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to say this. I'm not going to think this no matter what, because I think it's wrong. When you have a moral compass that gives you morals and principles, and you have an understanding or belief in something being, or certain things being right or wrong, you stand by those things no matter what the pressure is from the outside, no matter how people perceive you because of it. You choose to stay committed to what you know to be right. That's integrity. I would call it having a commitment to the truth. And that means sort of a dogged persistence to look at reality as clearly as possible, and not listen to any of the delusions in yourself or in people around you, because a commitment to truth and integrity, that's what is going to keep us out of that virtual prison of fear that is called groupthink. You have to be committed to the truth, steadfast and bold in the truth, no matter who it hurts, who it offends, who it upsets, a commitment to the truth no matter what. Now, I will say some people speak truth in hurtful ways. It is important for us, when we're talking to people and when we're dealing with people, to speak truth in love. And I know we're not all perfect, myself included. Sometimes I say things that I could say with a little bit more grace or a little bit more love, understanding that the thing that I'm about to say might hurt, offend, or upset some people. And I don't always succeed in that. And, I'm a work in progress, but I do recognize the importance of speaking the truth in love. But we have to speak the truth, because Jesus said something very interesting. In the book of Luke, chapter 4, I believe it's verse 18, he was quoting from the book of Isaiah. And he said that his mission was to heal the brokenhearted, to open the eyes of the blind, to set the captives free, right? He wanted to heal the brokenhearted, open the eyes of the blind, and to set the captives free. And then in the book of John, later on in his ministry, he said in John 8:32, he said, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." So Jesus says that he came to set the captives free. And then later on, he explains that the way that you set the captives free is by telling them the truth. Because many of us are slaves. We are shackled by mental chains that are keeping us in a certain group or a certain paradigm or a certain place or a certain mindset or a certain set of emotions. And one of the most effective weapons used by powerful people to keep you in that place is anger and fear. But Jesus came to break those things so that we could experience the freedom of being an individual, so that we could break out of that virtual prison of fear that is groupthink and think for ourselves. Because only when you are an individual thinking for yourself, standing on integrity, committed to the truth, standing on the principles that you believe to be right, that the moral compass that guides your life, only then can you be free. And it's very sad because this is not an issue, unfortunately, that is solely relevant to the secular world. This is something that I'm seeing in church now. The same hatred, the same illogical anger that I was seeing outside of the church is now coming into the church as people in the church start to fall into these group thinks, right? This group think. They start to look at people who don't feel the exact same way that they feel in very bigoted ways. And I've seen things coming from church members that I'm shocked by. I've seen things preached by pastors that I am very, very shocked and disappointed by, essentially calling anybody who doesn't agree with them racist. That's another story for another time. But what we have to understand is this: the truth shall make you free. There is a group of people who don't want you to be free. They want to continue to make you a mental slave. And why are they pushing groupthink? They're pushing groupthink because what they want is they want something called collectivism. Look it up, okay? Collectivism, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, is any of several types of social organizations in which the individual is seen as subordinate to the social collectivity, such as state, nation, a race, or social class. Collectivism may be contrasted with individualism, in which the rights and interests of individuals are emphasized. So what this country, the United States of America, what the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are all about is about exercising individualism, right? What made this country great? What made this country great is that somebody could get up and worship a head of lettuce and it was okay. So as long as they felt that to be right, Because they have something called the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights that protects that right. Individualism, the emphasizing the rights of the individuals are what made this country the greatest country on earth. This country is where the freedom to think, to be who you are, to feel who you are, flourished. And now what we have is we have people who are trying to mold society and create a society where individualism is demonized. When you are insisting on making individual choices, even over your own body, when you insist on being an individual and making choices for yourself and your family, you are demonized. It's dangerous. And you have people in churches calling other people outside of their frame, of their thought process, of their paradigm, people who want individual choice over their medical treatments and their bodies, evil, selfish, guilting them. Why? Because the goal of these culture creators is collectivism. That's what they want. They want collectivism. Who cares what you think, what you feel? You will sit down, you will shut up, you will do what we tell you, you will believe what we tell you, you will worship how we tell you, you will take these medicines, quote unquote medicines that we tell you, and you will do whatever we say. And if you don't, we will. You don't believe me? Go look at what happened to Soviet dissidents who disagreed with the Soviet Union during the reign of terror that was the Soviet Union. Go look at something called the Black Book of Communism. Go look at Mao Zedong, who murdered all of the intellectuals, all of the people who disagreed with them, and was responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people simply who disagreed. That's the danger of collectivism. When we start putting collectivism ahead of individual expression and individualism, and we say it's for the greater good, well, guess what? What that means is the ends justify the means. If collectivism, according to these people, is for the greater good, if we have to go and kill the intellectuals, if we have to go and kill the dissenters, the people who are not going along with what we're saying, that's totally okay. That's totally fine because it's for the greater good. So the ends justify the means. It's dangerous. That's very dangerous. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say that people Al Capone said that political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. He's not totally wrong when you look at certain things that have happened in this world and other parts of the world over the last 100 years. I also heard there was a lawyer or something for PBS, and he said something like, we want to round up all Republican voters and have Homeland Security take their children away and put them in re-education camps. Why? Why would you do that? If you don't believe me, you can look these things up. I'm not making it up. But here's the thing. Independent, individual thinkers, people who think for themselves, accomplish great things. When you look at the foundation of this country, it was built by men who were all independent thinkers. They stood up to King George and they said, enough. They were thinking for themselves. Here's what comes out of independent thinking. This is the preamble for the Declaration of Independence. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. Right now, we have a bunch of politicians who walk around thinking that they are our rulers, our owners, that we are nothing but a bunch of serfs. As a matter of fact, I remember not too long ago when Joe Biden was giving these nonsensical speeches about this being a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And he talked to the unvaccinated, most of whom are African American. We are the largest group of vaccine hesitant people. And he said, We have been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, like he was some sort of despot or some sort of daddy talking to his misbehaving children. It was very bizarre. He must forget that his quote unquote powers are derived from the descent of the governed. And that, according to the Declaration of Independence, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute to new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them that shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So when a government becomes despotic and evil, get rid of it and start a new one that will make sure to maintain your individual happiness and safety. This is what happens. See, individual thinkers created the abolitionist movement that got rid of slavery. But what happens in today's society, and they guilt you and they shame you for being an independent thinker, and they like to label you with the pejorative term conspiracy theorists. People don't like when people ask questions, especially when you challenge someone who claims to be an authoritative source. How dare you? They like to say things like, this is not open for debate. Everyone agrees the science is settled. And if you challenge them, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're a conspiracy theorist, right? But here's the thing. Minds are like parachutes. They're only good when they're open, okay? Because if you believe that where you fall in terms of groups and opinions cannot be questioned, then I would question what you believe, because truth can always stand up under investigation. Only lies can't. So maybe people who are seeking to squash individualism and independent thinking, maybe those people are in fact exactly who should be questioned. Daring to think for yourself, it can have consequences for sure. But I love the quote that says, in times of universal deceit, telling the truth can be a revolutionary act. And so what you have to decide is, with your life, with who you are you going to be an independent thinker? Are you going to think for yourself, or are you going to fall into groupthink and collectivism and become an automaton, thinking what you're told to think, feeling what you're told to feel, being a victim of your confirmation bias? That is the most important question that we need to ask ourselves. Because for those of you who are Christians, when I look at the Bible and I see Jesus, who we're supposed to be following after, he was an independent thinker, and I'm thankful for that. So anyway, I hope that you all enjoyed our talk today. I may have said some things that you disagree with, and that's okay, right? We're independent thinkers, but I invite you to research anything that I brought up. Go and look at it for yourself. Come to your own conclusions and be an independent thinker, be an individual, because it's not about groupthink. It's not about collectivism. The only way that we're going to be able to do this and maintain our freedoms as a people is to be able to stand up and think for ourselves. And so I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.